Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Gruber. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I am your co-host, Kathy Gruber.
And I'm Jason Mefford. And today we're going to talk about some perseverance things and knowing when to change direction. So as Kathy and I were talking, how you doing, what you've been up to, all of our, catch up as friends for the first little part before we start hitting record, there were kind of some common themes that both of us have been dealing with as of late. And it reminded me of an old speech that I had heard. It was given by a woman named Janet Leigh. And this would have been back in probably the 90s, right?
The actress?
No. She was the wife of the president of the university that I was going to.
Oh.
And she gave a speech at one of the events, and it was called "Knowing When to Persevere and When to Change Direction."
Yeah.
Because I think this is one of those hard things. Because especially if you're goal oriented, if you're all about manifestation, it's like we don't want to limit ourselves. The world is our oyster. We can do whatever, you never discourage anybody. But then there's the reality, right? And there's both practical reality, but there's also the universe that sometimes steps in and it's like, hello. So we'll talk about some roadblocks probably that come from that. And I think one reason that speech stood out for me so much is one of the examples that she shared was about her son. And it was very similar to me, right? Which is when I was a teenager, we moved out to the country. We were out away from everybody. Closest friend was like 2 miles away to ride to on my bike, right?
Wow.
So we were out not in the sticks, but yeah, we were out in the country, right? And so when we moved into the house, one of the things that my dad put in was a basketball hoop. He put in a basketball hoop on our driveway, and every day I would go out and I would shoot baskets, right? That was one of the things that I did. And so, when I was in middle school, one of the great things was I had my growth spurt before the other boys did. So when I was 13, all of a sudden, I was 5'9", and I felt like I was so tall. And, I was inches taller than everybody else. So playing, in middle school, hey, I was a little bit taller. Things were great. Loved basketball, would go out, I'd think about, little short guys like Spud Webb, that were great basketball players. And I think, I can do that. I can do that. I could be a professional basketball player. And so I would kind of have that in my mind. And in this speech, Janet's son had the same idea, right? But I grew really quick and I stopped at 5'9". So, if you think about the average height in the NBA, that's pretty short. Now, it doesn't mean that there haven't been people who have been very good players that were that height. But the reality is it was pretty far-fetched that I was going to play in the NBA. And so at some point, I had to decide, right? Is this a dream I'm going to give up, or am I going to persevere? And I chose to give it up. I mean, reality is, first off, I'm white. I'm only 5'9". I'm, was moderately good at dribbling, right? And so it's like, look, there were...
I just love that word.
Moderately. I dribble other ways very well.
I was going to say, I sneeze and that happens, so I don't know.
But, it was one of those where, again, it's like, well, do we persevere? Do we keep trying to push forward? Or do we, and it's not that we're giving up. And that's why I like the term change direction instead of giving up, because I think so much of the time, if we set our mind to something, we feel like we're giving up, and giving up is seen as being something bad, right?
Right.
But that's not really what it is at the end of the day.
Well, and that's so hard, and I'm struggling with this. I just left a responsibility that I had committed to. And that for me was part of it. It's like, oh, I'm letting people down. I committed to doing this. When I commit to something, I see it through. And when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And so to me, there was that inner struggle of, am I just giving up? Am I quitting? And, I was raised by my dad, who, his thing was, we don't raise quitters and you don't give up and you persevere. And, but at what point, one of his favorite phrases was, if I can't win, I don't want to play. And I had mentioned that to Eric, and he said, yeah, but at what point is it an unwinnable game?
Mm-hmm.
And at what point do you have to step out? And I was talking to a client of mine about this yesterday. I had already made the decision that I was stepping away from this position. And I was kind of torn about it. And I said, I kind of feel like I'm giving up, and I kind of, like, not failing, but like, the giving up thing, right? And he said, he used to be a contractor. And he said, Kathy, when I would hire guys for a contracting job, the first day I would say to them, there's two choices here, folks. You're going to make my life easier and better, or you're not. And if you're not, you're going to go. He said, so is this making your life easier and better? And I said, no. And he said, well, then you made your decision. And then I said, yeah, but I committed to do this thing. And he goes, Sisyphus. Something about Sisyphus keeps popping into my mind. And for those of you who aren't familiar with your Greek mythology, it's he was tortured. He was on the top of a mountain, and every day he pushed the rock up to the top, and every night the gods would force it back down. He was never able to get the rock to the top. And when he said that, of course, I knew the reference immediately because I'm a big nerd, and I went, yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, and because it's interesting, like that, how these things end up working out, and we feel like we're quitting, but we're not necessarily quitting, right? And I know I found kind of in my life, because a lot of people, especially like I said, if you're goal oriented, if you're like all about manifestation, you're like, I can do anything, right? But what I have found in my life is, anything that I have really manifested that I really wanted, it wasn't hard to do. Right. And so it's any time that I'm like Sisyphus and like, no, damn it, I'm going to get that boulder to the top of the mountain. I was so close yesterday. I was 95% there. And then you find yourself starting over again the next day. Again, to Sisyphus, it was the gods rolling it back down. Why? Well, they were either punishing him or they were trying to teach him a lesson. I like to think they were teaching him a lesson, right? So when things get to be hard, when it takes so much more of our energy to do it, maybe it's the universe saying, hello, Jason, quit rolling that up the mountain, right? There's other things that you do that would be much more fulfilling and in your higher interest.
Right. Well, and I've had this conversation with so many people, right? Because let's look at the manifestation thing, right? There's something you really, really want, and you put the energy out there that you're going to get it, and you step on the road to get it. And then roadblocks are thrown up, right? Boulders are thrown in your way, and there's a creek you got to cross, and then there's a storm, and then there's it's so hard to tell. And this is sort of the dichotomy of this, right? Are those roadblocks urging you to work harder, or are those roadblocks going, dude, you're on the wrong road, man, it's time to get off? And I've had this conversation with so many people who teach manifestation, who live their lives through manifestation, and everybody goes, we don't know. That's the mystery of the universe, right? Does that mean fight harder, or does that mean, dude, you're totally on the wrong path? And I don't know if there's a right answer to that. And that's sort of what I was faced with, right? And it's that the slot machine thing. You've already sat there for 20 minutes and you already put $100 in the slot machine. What if the next spin is the big one? Yeah. And you walk away and someone sits down and puts a quarter in and they get your winnings. This is how they get you. And I remember dealing with that in previous relationships. It's like, oh, I already put so much work into this, and stir something at any moment will change. And when I left my ex, that's what I was, this whole the slot machine thing. And then I realized the slot machine is a mechanical, computerized, randomized thing. Humans aren't. If humans want to make a change, they actually have the conscious ability to do so, and the machine doesn't. And that's when I was kind of like, why am I going to continue to put money in this, time in this, energy in this, love in this, if I'm not getting anything out? And so it was like that metaphor with the slot machine. That's what struck me during my previous relationship. And that kind of came up with this too. It's like, why am I going to keep kicking myself over and over again if I'm not getting a result?
Well, I think sometimes too, sometimes those roadblocks get in the way because we're trying to mismanifest. That's
Yep.
a
We're
word,
trying
right?
to force, I wrote down force
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
Yep.
we're trying to force something. And so I'll just give you some random example, right? Is this like, let's say I want to earn $1 million and I have in my head how I'm going to earn that $1 million, right? And so, again, we have to have some plan, we have to do something, right? But if I have so much attachment to, no, I'm going to make the $1 million this way, and I place all my attention on that, and I roll that boulder up the hill every day because the only way I'm going to get that $1 million is by rolling that boulder up the hill. And the universe is sitting there saying, Jason, we hear you. You won $1 million, but it doesn't need to come from rolling the boulder. It's
Mhm.
like just let go of the attachment that that's the way it's going to happen. Because literally what ends up happening is, at a time when we finally let go of that attachment and we wake up that one morning and we're like, you know what? I think I'm going to change direction. Rolling the boulder up the hill every day. It's really hard. And I
Mhm.
think there's probably I still want to manifest the $1 million, but I'm not going to be so tied up in the attachment of
Mhm.
how it has to do. And then I'm sitting there having my breakfast around the campfire, and all of a sudden I notice something shiny. And I walk over and I kind of move the rocks and dirt and plants out of the way. And there's a huge chunk of gold sitting there worth $1 million, right? Sometimes it's as simple as that. If we'll just get out of our own way and, stop persevering maybe in the wrong way and just don't have the attachment to how it's going to come. The universe
Yeah.
still wants to give it to you, right? And so think about the reasons behind why we're doing something,
Yep.
right? Like, Kathy, in your situation, there was a reason why you were volunteering. You took on this responsibility because you wanted to do something. Well, what is it that you wanted to do that's behind the scenes, not the
Yeah.
3D act of it, because there's other ways for you to do the same thing
Yep.
without all of the energetic vampire sucking.
hmm Well, and so as you were talking about this, so I was a theater major. I drove cross country with everything I owned in a U-Haul and a boyfriend I wasn't sure I liked, but he helped drive, so that was fine. And I left Pittsburgh and I drove to California to pursue the acting thing, and I landed in Hollywood. And all the adults in my life at that point, my dad, my uncles, family, friends, they were like, "Well, what's going to happen when this doesn't work for you?" I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't even consider it wouldn't work. I was top of my class. I was really good. I was a hard worker. And I'm like, I'm going to Hollywood and it's going to happen. Um, and after the first couple of years, I did tons of theater, which of course doesn't pay. And I
Mhm.
came this close to being the host of a major kids' TV show, but they gave it to someone who was Hispanic. And I'm good, but I can't pass for bilingual Hispanic. So I was like, this is out of my hands. Like, this is out of my control. And then I found myself auditioning to be a dancing piece of pizza. And I went, I'm a classically trained performer. And then I was working for my agent's office, and the breakdowns would come through every day, which is the description of what studios are looking for. And it said 5'8", dancer, psychology major, average looking, brown hair, brown eyes. Good Lord, it might as well have said send Kathy Groover. And so we send my photos, and I said, I actually am a dancer, and I was a psych minor, and da da. And I didn't even get called for an audition. And
Mhm.
I went, when the description basically says send Kathy Groover and I don't even get a call for an audition, what the fuck am I doing here? And between the dancing piece of pizza, which I also didn't get, by the way, which pissed me off, and this run, I was like, I'm out. What am I doing? So I ended up in production. I ended up finally moving to Santa Barbara. And when I said to my acting friends, I'm leaving. I'm done with the acting thing. They're like, oh, but you're so close. You're just about to have your big break. You're just okay. What does so close mean? I have friends who were regulars on Seinfeld who still aren't big actors. And I said, I'm going. And I gave up that dream of being on stage. And here we are 30 years later. And this past week, I was in Ohio in a basketball arena with my face on giant jumbotrons, entertaining and teaching 1,500 people. It happened. It just looks a little bit different.
Yeah, you're still
And
on stage
I'm still
entertaining
I'm still entertaining, and now I'm actually getting paid well for it. And I'm getting to teach people things. It's not me on a silly sitcom. No offense to, I would love to be on a silly sitcom, but it was like I'm still doing the thing. Like I always dreamt of being on a magazine cover, and that ended up happening with trapeze stuff. I dreamt of doing. I wanted to be on a billboard. That happened years ago in Times Square. So it's like all these things that I kind of put out there as a kid that I thought would be cycled around the acting performing part has happened in my life, but under the guise of something else. It's been like everything I put in motion. It's taken years. It wasn't as immediate, but the universe has a different timeline than us, right? So it's like you're not necessarily quitting that thing, you're just reshaping it, you're transforming it, transmuting it into something else. So I
Yes.
know the help that I was able to give to this organization, I know I'm still going to be able to do that. It's just going to be in a different role. It's going to be in a different guise.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
How do we,
that's,
oh, I was going to
oh,
ask you a question. So I have a
no,
question. So when I gave up acting, people were like, oh, I told you she'd give up. I knew it wouldn't work. I said, so you have all these naysayers, right? So when you decide to switch gear, when you decide to stop pushing to go get the $1 million and then you find the gold, how do we handle other people's perception of that? Oh, you quit. Oh, you gave it up. I knew you couldn't do it. You failed, because that's a huge influence on us, right? So
it does.
how do we handle all those people that are like, see, told you you couldn't do it. Yep, I knew you'd stop. I knew you'd give up. I knew you'd quit. You're a quitter, whatever, da, 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 da. How do we handle that?
Well, it all comes back to us not giving a damn about what other people think, right? Because it has nothing to do with us, right? And so for me, it means, sometimes, a change like this shows the true colors of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so certain people have been cut out of my life
Mm-hmm.
because they may have acted that way, when I made a change. Other people, I grow closer to because I see how they respond to the change. But, for me, ultimately, and again, I'm done this good all the time. I'm still learning how to do it. But, when somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, Jason, you're a quitter, right? You didn't become an NBA player. See, I told you you could never do that." Okay, that's their issue, not my issue,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of times when people say things like that, and this has become a lot more clear to me in some interactions I've had with people recently, when somebody says something like that, they're acting from a place of distorted energy, in that they feel so bad about themselves that they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
make me feel bad
Mm-hmm.
about myself so that they believe that they have more value because they're making me feel worse than they feel about themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so we can continue that cycle, or we can say in our head, you don't even have to say it out loud, but you can be like, bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a quitter. I just chose to change direction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I love myself. I know I'm not a quitter. I know I am consistent. I finish, I do what I say, but I also know that I'm allowed to make a different choice.
Yeah.
Right. And
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 it's
because for me, like first marriage, it was that way, it's like, oh, this is going to be forever, all this kind of stuff. And then I changed my mind. And I remember, that wife saying, well, you don't have any integrity because you told me this was going to be forever. And it's like,
mm-hmm.
well, I changed my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're allowed to change our mind, but we have to also be okay with that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
Within
got
within
the
within ourselves.
yeah, totally. I got the you broke our vows.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, well, great. It's also, and this popped into my head as you were talking, it's none of our business what anyone else thinks of us.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Oh,
I think that's the simple truth. It's harder to live it. but that's the
Yeah.
simple truth. That's how we get rid of the naysayers.
Yeah, and this says my choices have made sort of relationships very clear with people involved in this whole thing. It's been fascinating. It's been fascinating. So, okay. Well, this has been very helpful personally to me, and I'm sure to others. So, yeah.
Well, and to me, right?
And to
Because
you,
like we
yeah.
said at the beginning, we've both been going through some of these things, and when do we say no, and when do we change direction, and stop persevering, quit being Sisyphus.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone go read about Sisyphus. He's great. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I am Kathy Groover. I can be reached at kathygruver.coach.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out, have a great week, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. See ya.
See ya.